How many here in this room would like to, if they were given the opportunity, if I could call his agent, meet Count Dracula in a safe space? I'd just like to add that as well. How many, if you put your hand up? Quite a lot. That's good. Okay. I admire your curiosity. If self-preservation is our strongest instinct, then curiosity is a drive that can override that. Curiosity is a wonderful thing. It's good for brain health. Curious people are more likely to be positive, more likely to be hopeful. It's a drive that helps us acquire new skills, find new friends. Curious people tend to ask more direct questions, so they tend to learn from their experiences more. But everyone who put your hand up, you're now all dead, because there is no safe space with Dracula. I lied to you, I tricked you, and I'm sorry. But horror stories are a great way to explore fear and curiosity. If you think about curiosity as a forward movement, then fear is a backwards movement. And that tension between the two, that's a wonderful place for stories to come to life. And curiosity and storytelling is what I'd like to talk to you about today. I am a lecturer, I teach and I study stories, and I'd like to start with a story. So, on August 4th, 1897, in the midst of a terrible storm, the Russian schooner Demeter crashes ashore in the small village of Whitby in the north of England. As the schooner strikes land, a giant dog leaps off the boat and runs into the village. The only crew they can find is the captain, and he is dead, tied to the wheel. In one hand is a crucifix, in the other is a glass bottle, and in that glass bottle is a piece of paper. It is a fragment of the ship's log. And what that ship's log revealed was that the schooner left Varna in Bulgaria 29 days previously, and it had 9 members of the crew. And slowly and mysteriously, those crew began to disappear. There were reports of a ghostly figure, but after a thorough search of the ship, nothing is found. One man is so afraid, he walks off the boat and into the ocean rather than spend another night on board. What happened to these men? Who were they? What's it like to be trapped on a boat with a monster? What's it like to live in fear? In less than 5 pages, Dracula kills more men than he does in the other 500 pages of the book. But the details are scant, the story is thin, and the characters are non-existent. Why is this? Bram Stoker has inserted a negative space in the middle of the story. He has put a big hole in the middle of the story. And he has done that so the reader or the audience can fill it with their own imagination, with their own stories. They can bring that story to life. And if you think about the negative space, it's like a question. But it's a question with no answer. Or a question with an infinite number of answers, but none of them are correct. We can refer to this sort of question as a mystery. And what's so great about Dracula, the book, is that as soon as he poses this mystery, what happened on the Demeter, he asks you another question, a more pressing, a more urgent question. When the dog jumped off the boat, that was Dracula transmogrified. Dracula had arrived on the shores of England. So what happens next? Who will survive? A question made even more pressing by the fact that he had just killed 9 people. Questions are a wonderful way to entice curiosity. They present us with knowledge gaps. And as soon as we see a knowledge gap, we almost instinctively try and close that knowledge gap. We try and search for the information. Open knowledge gaps actually make us uncomfortable. We hate to not know. And if you think about it, most stories can be boiled down to a single question. In this case, will they overcome the monster? Will they kill Dracula? And to keep you interested in this big question, they ask you a series of smaller questions. Who is this person? Where are they? What are they doing? What happens next? A series of interconnected questions that pull you through the story. A current of curiosity. And the good thing about these questions, they have definitive answers. We can refer to these sorts of questions as puzzles. They have definitive answers. Yeah? Who is this person? Jonathan Harker. Will he survive? Yes. Can Jonathan Harker kill Dracula? Well, I don't want to spoil it for you. You can find out by reading the book. These sorts of questions, they're fantastic because they're entirely predictable. Yeah? If we ask a question and we give too little information, then there is very little curiosity induced. If we ask a question and we give too much information, then the answer is easy to predict, and so there is low amounts of curiosity. But if you ask a question and you give just the right amount of information, and you open up a knowledge gap, then curiosity is induced. A young, naive, newly qualified solicitor travels to deepest Transylvania to meet a mysterious count, to help him with his real estate. How curious, very strange situation. If puzzles, the great thing about puzzles is they reward us when we solve them, when we close the information gap. They give us dopamine. They trigger the dopaminergic system, and they give us dopamine. Dopamine is the chemical in our brain that makes us happy, so solving puzzles actually makes us happy. So if puzzles are solved when we close the information gap, mysteries are not. The great thing about mysteries is that they're never solved. They can sustain us. They can allow prolonged inquiry, prolonged creative thought. They can't simply be Googled away. The good thing about mysteries is that Google can't help at all, because Google wants to tell us the most likely answer. A mystery is a question with no most likely answer. In fact, it has an infinite number of possibilities, and all of them are the most likely answer. So you can't just Google them away. So if stories compel us to answer puzzles, it's the curious that solve the mysteries. So how do we encourage people to be curious? How do we encourage people to solve mysteries? We are naturally curious. As a small child, we ask hundreds of questions a day. But it naturally wanes, it naturally decreases also. And as we get older, we become less curious. We also become lazy. But our education, our institutions, our jobs, they don't encourage us to be curious. They don't encourage curious behavior. They want us to solve puzzles. They don't want us to solve mysteries. Puzzles are quantifiable. We can measure the success of how people answer puzzles. It's difficult to do that with mysteries. But we become lazy. We fall back on the information that we've garnered throughout our life, and we use that information to solve all of our problems rather than building a scaffolding so that we can further inquire and learn more. Walt Whitman said, via Ted Lasso, that's the only reason I know about it, be curious and be humble. Right? So
spotting our own information gaps is something we're really not very good at. We really are not aware of how much information we don't know. And we're afraid of our knowledge gaps. We're afraid to not know. But really, the edge of our knowledge is just the place to dive in for more inquiry. And if you want to encourage curiosity, we have to be able to recognize our own knowledge gaps. Bo Lotto said, nothing interesting starts with knowing. It starts with not knowing. Everything interesting starts with a question. So if we recognize our own knowledge gaps, then it should inspire us to ask more questions. We can also take inspiration from Stoker. Stoker leaves his mysteries at the back of the story. Now, what happened on the Demeter? What happened to Renfield? How did Dracula become a vampire? These mysteries sit in this story, but we're not compelled to answer them. We're compelled to find out what happens to Jonathan or Mina Harker. You know? He gives us time to consider it. In this modern world, when we're presented with a puzzle, we're almost immediately Google our response. We'll reach for our smartphones and we'll answer. We'll close that gap and we'll get our little magic hit of dopamine as well to make us feel better. We don't have time to sit and think and gestate on a problem, consider the question, look at it from different angles. Can we turn that puzzle into a mystery with a little bit of time? And of course, phones are a terrible sucker of time. They destroy our time. My weekly mobile phone screen time report is a horror story all in itself. And my student screen time reports, well, they're unimaginable. I don't even know how they exist as human beings. But it sucks away the gaps. If you're waiting for a bus, if you're waiting for the tram, if you're waiting for a TED talk to end as soon as it possibly could, you can reach for your phone. Yeah? You can fill that gap. You can read about the football news, you can watch a funny animal video, and then that time is lost. We never spend time sitting, being bored, letting our mind wander, letting things just drift in and out of thought. Solving mysteries is a creative problem. It's about divergent thinking, and that requires time for our information to kind of filter down into the subconscious and then present itself back. It's why we have so many good ideas when we're in the shower. So we need to ask questions, we need to recognize our knowledge gaps. You know? Curiosity also requires an edge of uncertainty. And we are hardwired to avoid uncertainty. We absolutely hate uncertainty. We do not like things where we cannot predict the outcome. But we love stories when we cannot predict the outcome. Uncertainty is the lifeblood of stories. It drives it forward. Yeah? And stories can do all these wonderful things. They can show us our knowledge gaps. They can ask us questions. They can show us our assumptions. They can take us to mysteries and they can leave them there. And stories can do this in a safe and playful environment. Stories can help us stay curious. Storytelling is the lifeblood of curiosity. Thank you very much.